the slides up.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, can everyone see the slides? Just a thumbs up from, right? Okay. All right, if we're not good, let me know.
We got an email from PNC Bank about a bank account.
Okay, all right. So in the last class, we went over the letter of inquiry. I do have a sample LOI for you. It was emailed out last night. Those in the room, we have one here too. I just wanted to point out a few good things about the LOI sample. And I know I touched on a few of the things at the last class, but we didn't have the LOI in front of us. So in the first paragraph, it says, I appreciate the time Ann Jonas has taken to communicate with us. That means that you, as the writer of this LOI, did your homework and you called ahead. And that points that out right off the bat in this paragraph. And then if you'll note in the first paragraph, they actually have written in there how much they want and why. And that's always good to have at the very least in your first paragraph. The second paragraph starts with established as a 501c3 organization in 2008. And this sample letter is written in 2012. So first of all, that's pointing out that you are, your status as a 501c3 organization, also lending credibility because it means this program, has been around for 4 years. They use the word empower in the first sentence, which is a great word, but they don't just use the word and then, not give an example as to why. And then, the program's utilizing discipline of swimming to improve physical fitness, nurture self-esteem, and acquire confidence to advance their lives. Those are great phrases. They're meaningful. And then further on, it shows that it's an already established program. More than 450 youth have participated. So credible local statistics that they've stuck in there. The next paragraph down, that last sentence, the drowning rate for African Americans between the ages of 5 and 14 was 3 times that of Caucasians. So that is Centers for Disease Control. That's using your national statistics. And then, with the local statistics up in the previous paragraph. And then on the second page, we talked a little bit about specific and measurable goals. And that's what they've done here. They've just briefly laid out, these are what we plan to do. These are the goals we plan to meet in 2012. And then the outcomes listed above represent a 25% increase in the number of students we will serve. That's measurable. They will know when they hit that 25% increase. The next paragraph, I love that they are asking XYZ Foundation to join us as a partner in this important program. You are a partner. You're partnering with these foundations. Then briefly, they have, here's what our total budget is. We still need to raise 150,000. So your gift of 25 will go a long way. Just kind of tying it all together, and then always put a phone number and an email. This one doesn't have the email there, but some funders do prefer email to phone, especially in this day and age. It's easier to send an email at 7 o'clock at night, instead of, picking up the phone and calling someone where you have to schedule that during the day. So that just briefly, goes through that sample letter of inquiry. It's a great letter. There are problems with it, but those things that I pointed out are really good about it. So then in the last class, we also finished up talking about the need statement and the problem statement. We use those titles interchangeably. Some funders call it the need statement, some call it the problem statement. But before we move on to the rest of the grant application, I do want to talk a little bit more about the needs statement because it's probably one of the most important parts, except for perhaps the executive summary, one of the most important parts of your grant. So we mentioned that the needs statement needs to answer the question, why should I care for the funder? And some of these slides are just going to help you further your writing of a great needs statement. I am not one to sit here and read slides. You can look at them on your own. But on this slide in particular, we talked about using jargon and unfamiliar concepts and terms. Make sure you keep jargon out of it. And then definitely the long drawn out convoluted sentences, keep them out of your needs statement as well. On the next slide, after you've read your needs statement or your problem statement, read it entirely through and then ask yourself some of the questions. Oh, I think we skipped. Did we skip ahead to? No, maybe I have them out of order. Go to the next one and then we'll go back to that one. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I put them out of order. Sorry. So is your problem statement focused on those who are going to be served by the program? Not focused just on your organization. Does the problem statement connect the funder's mission to yours? We talked extensively about that. Given your organization's size and resources, can you address the problem in a meaningful way that is demonstrated in the statement? And I know I have a typo there. It should be organization apostrophe S. As a writer, I pay attention to those things. Is the problem statement adequately supported by solid data? Is it sweet? Is it simple? Is it persuasive? And then the next slide, or the slide back, I guess, just some words that are lively that will make your proposal stand out. And remember to back up those words and use them with data that supports why you're using those words. Try and pull at the heartstrings a little bit for your funder. Pare down the language, tighten it up. More is not better. Get rid of the fluff. You want it to be compelling. And then definitely using statistics that are thoughtfully placed in there, not just simply throwing statistics in because you want statistics there. So with that, we're going to move on 2 slides, Jess, I'm sorry, to the grant application. And we're going to talk about goals and objectives. This is probably one of the hardest parts for the grant writer to write. And I don't know why, but when you're taking your mission and you're trying to look at what your program is going to accomplish, pulling out the goals and objectives to help you accomplish that program take a lot of creativity. But before, you have to know and understand what goals are and what objectives are. Goals are broad, long-term intentions or statements. And they're similar to your mission statement, but they give just slightly more focus, vision, and direction based on what you're trying to accomplish. They can be idealistic, so they could be pie in the sky. They don't necessarily have to be reached during the proposed grant period. This would be something long-term, and your project is helping to meet this goal, but it may not accomplish it entirely. And sometimes a goal can't even be met by just one project alone. It might take multiple projects to meet that. And they might be non-specific, and many times they're not measurable. So for example, if the goal of your organization is to eliminate youth violence, realistically, that might never be achieved, and certainly not through one grant to one organization. But there are many programs that put together could help to eliminate youth violence, but most likely you're never going to eliminate it entirely. So your goals might be affected by factors that are hugely complex, numerous, and might not even be in the control of the sole organization itself. So something like a youth meditation program might be one intervention that would help to reach the goal to eliminate youth violence. So if everyone understands that is what a goal is. A goal doesn't have to be specific. Objectives, on the other hand, are realistic steps that achieve the goals. This is where your programs come in, and they're the outcomes that can be expected from the project itself. So objectives are always active. Make sure you're using strong action verbs. They should be concrete and clear, and they need to answer the questions, the what, why, who, how, when. Objectives are validated through results, and they're clear to everyone that has a basic knowledge that's reading the application. So they're SMART, and SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And if you've written grants, if you've done strategic planning, pretty much everybody on the call, I think, would be familiar with SMART goals. So objectives, I'm sorry. If you haven't taken the time to think through what exactly you want to achieve and how you're going to accomplish that, then you can't really come up with your objectives, and truly you're wasting your own time and the funder's time. There's two sets of goals and objectives to think about. First of all, the goals and objectives of the funder should be considered. If they're stated, then right there on their website, you can look at their vision, their mission, their goals. How do they intend to meet their vision and mission? If they're not right there on their website, then you have to start digging around to see if you can find them. And then if not, you're just going to have to assume generically what they're based on, according to what their mission is. And then the second set of goals and objectives to think about, obviously, are your own, your organization's goals and objectives, and how they fit nicely into the funder's goals and objectives. And like I said, you're going to hear me say that continuously through this whole class. You have to match your funder with everything. So you could have a reading program maybe, and you could say that it's delightful. All the participants love it, but does that mean that it's working? So delightfulness of a program can't be measured, but what could be measured is tests on a score, on scores on a test, attitudes about books, interest in reading, whether interest has changed based on a survey. Objectives for a meditation program for at-risk youth might include something like a positive change among program participants by the end of the first 6 months or years, as evidenced by the results from a test that measures attitude toward conflict resolution or towards violence, or and then you could say, okay, we're going to see a reduction of 50% in violent incidents among the participants in the program by the end of the year, or a 60% increase in school attendance by the end of the year. These objectives are things that are measurable, and you as the grant writer will know whether or not they have been met by the program, and then you can demonstrate that to your funder. So we'll go through a couple other examples of objectives. For this one, it's a collaborative after-school basketball program, and it's for at-risk youth in a lower income neighborhood. Objective number one is improved behavior. By the end of the first 6 months of the project, participants will demonstrate improved behavior in school as a result of project requirements and activities. This will be measured through incident reports, teacher observations. So you have a way to measure whether or not you have met objective one, which is improved behavior. Objective two, reduction in violent incidents. By the end of the project, participants will demonstrate 50% decrease in violent incidents during the program, measured by incident reports. Did the incident reports at school drop? And then objective number 3, by the end of the project, participants will have a 40% improvement in school attendance. So did school attendance increased? Can you show that? Those are measurable objectives. Once your objectives are determined, then you can develop your methods to achieve each objective and goal. So you might require perfect attendance in the after school program, which would require the student to be in school that day. And then during the program, you might talk about sportsmanship, playing fair games, following rules. You might give penalties for roughhousing or using offensive language. So these activities or rules or methods are each designed with one of your objectives in mind. And then your methods all work together to help you meet each objective. And then you still have a great program where, you know, the kids are having fun, but you've worked in these measurable steps to help you know whether or not the program is working. It's not just simply a delightful program. So I have a couple questions that, you know, just basic questions that would help you with writing your objectives. So based on your problem statement, what are the key areas that you're seeking to change? Who would be involved in the change? And who specifically, being what segment of the community? Who are the individuals at your program that are going to be participating in achieving your methods and your objectives? How is the change going to be measured and by how much? So we saw in those statements a 40% increase, a 30% decrease. When will the change take place? And this is important. Is this a change that is going to take place simply by the end of the grant period? You know, most grant cycles are around a year, some are 18 months. So when? By the end of the grant cycle? Or is it going to take 5 years and, you know, you're looking at this for the first 18 months? You can even be specific and say, you know, by the end of the school year, by June 6th, these are what we will accomplish. Are your objectives SMART? Specific, do they clearly explain what the change will be? And are they action oriented? Are they measurable? How will you know specifically if you've reached the goal? Are they achievable? Are you at your organization going to be able to make that change that you envision? And you have to think about this. Do you have the staffing? Do you have the resources? Do you have the physical space to make sure that you can achieve these objectives? Are they relevant? Are they rewarding to the organization and to the funder? Are they beneficial to the community being served? And then obviously time bound. What is the deadline and is it traceable? So include usually one goal within a grant application, sometimes two, and then make sure that you choose objectives that match those goals. And then make sure that your methods within your objectives actually tie back to the objectives, and then make sure that everything ties back to your problem statement. And then definitely allow plenty of time to accomplish your objectives. And many grant funders are absolutely fine knowing that you are not going to finish, reach your objectives or your goals by the end of a grant period. That, you know, this may be the start of a program and you're using their funding to, you know, meet maybe the first 2 objectives out of 6. Or, maybe you're going to make sure that you reach the first goal, but your second goal, you're only going to hit a portion of it. Don't overly commit yourself. Make sure that what you can accomplish, that you're committed to accomplishing it, and that you can do it, in the time frame that you're saying you can. Don't confuse your methods or activities with outcomes. And then don't forget to budget for your evaluation activities. So then I do have a methods worksheet that I will hand out to everyone. Methods are detailed descriptions of the activities that your organization is going to implement to achieve the objectives. So on the methods worksheet, you're going to have I would do one worksheet for every objective. And so if you have 3 objectives for each goal, then you would have 3 worksheets. And the worksheet simply allows you to outline your tasks and subtasks that are going to help you achieve that, that method. It allows you the ability to write down who is personally responsible for each of the tasks and subtasks. It allows you to write down what resources you need to achieve those, and then a start date and a finish date. It's just a very simple worksheet. I used it a lot when I wrote grants for the medical equipment recycling program, because I had to, in my brain, really try and figure out what are the tasks and subtasks that would allow me to achieve measurable objectives. Because the program was difficult to measure. It wasn't a program where we wanted to specifically grow it. It really was a program where we were trying to sustain the program through funding that would allow us to kind of add different types of medical equipment to what we were loaning. And so, for a long period of time, we didn't have, anything in the lines of, rollator walkers that had a seat on them. And so our objective then was that, our goal was that we wanted everyone to have the ability to live at home with dignity and to have the equipment that they needed to live at home with dignity. And so that was a goal, a very broad goal. And some of the objectives were, okay, well, we have a wheelchair program. And so we, are hoping to repair and be able to loan out 300 wheelchairs during the first 6 months of the program. And then how are we going to get there? Well, we need to be able to pull in the donated wheelchairs from the public. So that would be a task. Well, how are we going to do that? We're going to have equipment collection days at locations like the mall or the hospital. So that might be a task. And then the person responsible for those collection days might be a coordinator of collection days. And then the resources that are needed. Well, we'll need flyers, we'll need marketing, and then the start and the finish date. Well, we hope to have 300 wheelchairs by 1 month so that we have 2 months to be able to repair them and loan them out. Well, then the repair is the next task. And how are we going to repair? Well, the person responsible for that repair is a maintenance person. What are the resources needed? Maybe 6 of the wheelchairs need new wheels. 3 of them might need new armrests. And then what are the start and finish dates for that? So that's how you start to develop your tasks and subtasks related to your methods that are achieving your different objectives. I hope that helps to make sense. To develop your methods, there's some questions that you can ask. So what are the elements that are inflexible? For instance, like I said, with the MERT program, with the wheelchairs, the completion date. Are we able to complete repairing 300 wheelchairs in 1 month so that we still have 1 month to be able to loan them out? Do we have the money available? Do we have the staffing available? The next one with the methods, what activities need to be carried out in order to meet that method and the objectives. And then what are the starting and ending dates of each of the activities? Who is responsible for completing each activity? And if you are contracted as the grant writer, you need to know within that organization the specific name, telephone number, email, whatever contact information you need to know so that you can determine whether or not this organization is on track to complete each activity. And that you need to know before you're writing this grant so that you're able to state to the funder 6 months in, yes, we're on track to complete this program, or, ooh, we ran into a couple hiccups. The person wasn't able to, maybe the weather was bad when they scheduled an equipment collection day and nobody came. So then they had to schedule a new equipment collection day. But if you're upfront with your funder about these things, most funders realize that you're going to have hiccups. But knowing the who is responsible for the activity so that you as the grant writer can go back to them once you are awarded the grant and say, okay, it's go time. You've got 3 months. You have to achieve this by month 1, this by month 2, this by month 3, according to what you told me your methods were, according to what you said that your tasks and subtasks were, and the start and finish dates for each. How is the organization going to accomplish everything together? That needs to be considered when you're writing your objectives. And then, are the goals stated as results? Are the objectives stated as results? And do both relate to the problem statement? Are they stepping stones? This is how I always thought of your goals, objectives, methods. Your methods are stepping stones to achieve your objective. And then your objectives are stepping stones to achieve your goal. And then are they understandable? And this is a big thing. A lot of times in your mind, you understand everything and you write it on paper and you think it sounds understandable, but the funder gets it and they're like, I don't even understand what they think they're trying to say. Again, this is where I would always give my pieces of my grant application to someone else, have them read it, and then have them tell you what that application says. So make sure that you have that methods worksheet. I don't think, it is. It's labeled methods exercise and it's worksheet 5.1, but it is literally 4 columns with titles at the top. It's not very self-explanatory, so that's why I like to just kind of touch on it a little bit. After you determine your goals and objectives, now you develop your timeline. So during what time frame are different objectives and methods going to be completed? And so you can see the timeline up here is one that I pulled from this, the only grant writing book you'll ever need. And it's laid out, as a chart where the funder can look at it and say, okay, I can see that by month 3, they're going to accomplish this, this, and this. By month 11, everything should be implemented. By the end of the year, we're going to get the final test scores. And then, by the end of the year, usually most funders who have a 1-year cycle will allow you another month for reporting. An 18-month cycle, they'll allow you 19 months. So, make sure that as the grant writer and grant reporter, that you're not waiting until month 11 to pull all of the data to show that you met all of your objectives. Make sure that you're pulling that information according to your timeline, and make sure then in reverse that your timeline is written by whoever, by whoever in the organization that is developing the timeline for you, Make sure that you're following it and that it's easy for the funder to follow, and make sure that it's easy for you to follow. So construct your timeline using every activity that you have to establish. This is a short timeline. For the medical equipment recycling program, we had maybe at least a timeline that was double this, because we were trying to do multiple objectives within the goal. And so you're going to construct that timeline to include each activity that you need to do to implement and evaluate the program. And then you can break it out by months like this one did. And you don't necessarily, if you're applying to an organization and you're going to receive your funding in maybe June, then your timeline doesn't necessarily have to physically say June. Your timeline can be like this: month 1, month 2, month 3. Now, there are some programs and funders that would prefer to see it broken out, June of 2022, July of 2022, so that they can see and understand exactly when during the year their funding is going to be used, right at a glance. But usually a basic timeline like this is enough for a funder. And you might have a program that is going to be accomplished in 3 months. Well, obviously, you're not going to break that out by months. You're going to want to break that out by weeks. If you have a program that maybe is going to be complete in 2 weeks, you might break that out by days. So whatever suits the program properly is how you establish your timeline, or the staff member that's responsible for establishing the timeline. And then make sure that you, as the grant writer, like I said, what staff member is responsible for ensuring what activity is completed. And you can include that in your grant application if you want to, as a narrative with your timeline, or you can just keep that on your own for your own information. Now, this timeline, they start with what is going to happen when you're awarded the grant. And then, for instance, they're going to prepare the ads for hiring the staff. Then they're going to, develop a board, an advisory board, and then they're going to recruit and hire the director. So, month 1, the project director then is going to work with the board to conduct the needs assessment, recruit the staff. What tools are you going to use to evaluate whether or not these different pieces of your timeline are being accomplished? Make sure you develop those tools now while you're writing the grant. You don't want to get to the point where you've got the funding, the funder says, okay, here's your timeline. And then you're like, oh no, I have absolutely no idea how we're going to meet this timeline. You need to know that up front. You need to have the curriculum developed up front. So for this one, month 3, they're recruiting the participants to further develop the program. And then they're also producing reproduction of or the materials for the class. They're finished recruiting for program participants. Months 4 through 11, they're running the program, or what are the specific things that are happening during each of those months? Are there pre-tests, post-tests? And then month 11 and 12, are those post-tests completed? Is the data compiled? Begin to analyze your results, and then develop any changes to the program so that you can let the funder know, this happened, it was an excellent program, or no, there were some bumps in the road that happened during month 6, 7, and 8. This is how we turned things around to make sure that we changed the program to make it more effective. And then definitely sending that final report to the funders. Work into your own timeline. It shouldn't be probably on your funder timeline, although we have seen timelines come in to the Buhl Regional Health Foundation where it literally says, 6-month report due, 12-month report due, right in their timeline. You don't need to necessarily have that in your funder's timeline, but definitely have it in your own timeline. Your timeline doesn't necessarily need to be laid out in a chart like this one shown here. It could be bullet points within a paragraph. A lot of times that's what I did for the medical equipment recycling program. Just a bullet and a few sentences of this is what's going to happen during this time period. And it could also be a paragraph. Your timeline can come in multiple different formats, but don't skimp on it. If I was using this chart as my timeline, I would also have a paragraph with it, a narrative that helps to explain in a little more detail what's being done, during, so recruit participants is very general. I would have in my paragraph, something like we will, the executive director will recruit participants through what outlets are you going to use for the recruitment? And, giving a little more detail what's being done by who. So that was a lot, the goals, the objectives, the methods, and the timeline in my mind, all always tied together. And that's why I always felt it was important to teach them during the same, class period, because you really have to see and understand them and how they tie to your mission and your vision and what you hope to accomplish. So then on the next slide, we finally get to talk about evaluation and outcome evaluation and sustainability. So now that you have all of your goals and objectives, your method, your timeline, all pulled together, now you need to determine how you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the program. And this is done through program evaluation. And you have to make time within your grant period for evaluating the program. Work that into your timeline. If you know that it's a 12-month program and you only have month 13 before that final report is due, then you need to work your program evaluation. You need to be evaluating it as you go along. Foundations are held to high standards by the laws that are requiring them to show transparency and accountability for their charitable giving. So they're under a lot of pressure to ensure that their giving is done right. And we feel that here at the Buhl Regional Health Foundation. There's a lot of sleepless nights on my end because I have board members saying to me, how do we know our money is going to, programs that are truly improving health and wellness in our community? So you as the grant writer need to keep that in mind. These funders are up at night worried about how their funding is being utilized within the community because they have pressure from the IRS, showing that they are accountable, that they are, transparent with their funding. And then you as the program, as the grant writer, obviously you want to know whether or not your program is making a difference as well. Too many people, too many grant writers are not thinking about how they're going to complete the evaluation until that report is due. And that is not the time to go back and start looking through and saying, oh my gosh, how are we going to evaluate whether or not this program works? The best time, obviously, to think about evaluation is while you're developing the program. So you need to select the outcomes and indicators that are going to tell you whether or not that program is working. And then you can collect the information carefully and systematically while the program is functioning. And then this will show you whether or not you're getting the results that you perceived you would get, that you intended to get, and that you told your funder you were going to get. Sometimes staff members are very leery of evaluation. And so when you go in as the grant writer and you're talking about evaluation, you need to let them know that it's not about you looking over their shoulders. You know, you're not monitoring every single activity that these staff members are doing. You're trying to look at and evaluate the entire program and determine what is working, what isn't working, and then how to fix what needs to be fixed. The evaluation portion of your grant should answer critical questions that both the organization should have and the funder should have. Number one, was the program successful? That's kind of a no-brainer. And did it do what it was supposed to do? And then number two, what impact did it have on your target population? And how do you know it had that impact? What did you learn throughout the whole process? And then what worked, what didn't work, and why or why not did things work? And then what's different in the community as a result of the program? You don't necessarily, as the program executive director, need to hire an evaluator. Some of the larger programs where federal funding may require an actual external evaluator to come in and evaluate the program. But most of the time for foundation grants, evaluation can be done internally, provided you have enough staff to commit to it or volunteers to commit to it. A good evaluation is going to help you learn the program's strengths and weaknesses. So you and the staff should want an evaluation. And it shows the impact, it shows strength within the proposal, and it reassures the funder that the organization is interested in learning whether or not the program is truly effective, whether or not this was a true need in the community, or whether it was perceived. And so there's two common ways for an organization to evaluate their program and success. There's process evaluation and there's outcome evaluation. Process evaluation, you are literally assessing the functioning of the program and providing feedback to allow for corrections to the program. So things that you might consider are activities occurring when and where they should be. Did the activity happen? Like I said, with the medical equipment recycling program, we did at one point have an equipment drive, and it ended up being at the mall in the middle of a snowstorm. And we literally got 3 wheelchairs and a couple of bath benches. And so what did you do? What did you learn from that activity? Did you do another activity to supplement that? Did you not have time to do another activity? Who's receiving these services and how well is the program being implemented? Could the services be done more efficiently? And were participants satisfied? So this type of evaluation oftentimes uses focus groups. It uses personal reports, observation notes, surveys, interviews, case files. And this type of evaluation is extremely helpful, maybe in the first few years of a program, because it allows you feedback that allows you to look at the program and determine where changes might need to be made. Outcome evaluation is a little bit different. With outcome evaluation, you're measuring program effectiveness and the program's impact on the problem. This is a little bit harder. So you're looking at, have the objectives been achieved, and have the pieces of the objectives that you said you would achieve with this grant been achieved? And then in addition, how will you achieve further objectives? And then did the target population change as a result of the program? Maybe you're cruising along and you think that, hey, we really needed to reach the kids in Sharpsville schools because we thought they didn't know how to swim because they didn't have a pool. But actually, what we found is that the kids at Sharon School don't really know how to swim because even though they have a pool, they're not utilizing it. And so we had to change our program and the whole, population, the target population as a result of what we found. Did any unanticipated results occur and were they desirable? There are a lot of times where you're going through a program and it's like, wow, we never even really considered that this might be an outcome. And so now we have something else, more objectives, new grant funding that we can go after because we have these new unanticipated results and we would like to change our program to focus on that. What factors contributed to any changes that occurred? How cost effective is the program? What impact did the program have on the problem? And was new knowledge generated? So outcome evaluation is usually very formal in approach, and it usually measures like the before and after attitudes, behavior changes. A lot of times there's a control group. So you might have a group outside of the program that they did not participate in the program. And then you have a group that did participate and you're comparing. But the biggest thing is to let the funder know that you care about your outcomes and that you've thought carefully about how you're going to demonstrate whether or not you have succeeded with the program. So simply making the case that collecting information that you're going to use as indicators, looking at changes in those indicators from the beginning to the middle to the end of the program, and how that is going to help you indicate if the program is working and that the information you're collecting is directly related to your objectives. That is usually enough for the funder. So they're going to look at your evaluation section and they're going to ask themselves, how are we as the funder going to know whether or not this project worked? What are the specific objectives that they called out? And then how will we as the funder determine whether or not they met those objectives and those objectives were achieved? So if you can make this easy for the funder, you have a better chance of being funded. They're going to say, how were we as the funder able to determine which of the objectives were achieved and which were not? And then how are we going to know if the activities were conducted the way they were planned? So they, in return, and this is what we do at Buhl Regional Health Foundation now, this is something new that we've developed, is we will actually look at your grant application. We're going to look at your objectives. We're going to look at how you say you're achieving those objectives. And then we're going to base your midterm and final report questions on whether or not those objectives were achieved. What is the data that we want you to collect to show that these objectives were achieved? And many funders will do that. Some funders, I know the Community Foundation in Sharon, they don't require a lot of, like reporting. They just want to see, maybe a couple of stories, a little bit of data. But then there's other funders that are very specific, that really truly have to show their board that yes, their funding is making a difference. Aside from answering those questions, there's some things that you might want to consider that the funder might ask you once the project is complete. So aside from these previous questions we talked about, they might want to know, are there any unexpected events that affected the success of the project? And I know this is a question that we do ask similarly on our midterm report and the final report. And then what did you learn from those unexpected events? Every unexpected event is a learning experience. Make sure that you use them as such. Did the staff members who were hired to run the project follow everything that they were supposed to do? Were they the job descriptions that were initially placed in the proposal? Did you partway through the program realize, gee, we hired this type of person, but really we needed a person with these skills. And so, maybe you had to hire additional staff. And don't be afraid to tell the funder where you made these changes, and because it shows the funder that you're thinking about it and you learned from it. Was there community buy-in for your program? Was there support from other organizations? This is very important too. Can the project be replicated? A lot of funders like to see a program, and this was something else that I ran into as I was writing grants for the medical equipment recycling program. Medical equipment recycling program is a simple program to replicate across the country in communities that have populations that might not be able to afford medical equipment that they need. And so I had a funder at one point who, really loved our program, and they were in, out east in, the Philadelphia area. And they wanted to know, how could we replicate your program out here in the Philadelphia area? And they actually ended up doing that. And then, they're going to ask you, should anything change about the program? What along the way did you find that would make the program better? So a couple examples of evaluation. Outcome evaluation would be a comparison of children's reading scores prior to the program and then after the program. And then you could also do reading scores of children that didn't participate in the program. And then a number of students that were accepted into college after a college-bound program. Pre and post tests that determine a teenager's knowledge of maybe something like alcohol use or the effects of vaping on the body. Those are all outcome evaluations. You want to make the linkage between your activities and your outcomes, and it should be clear in your evaluation. The linkage is spelled out in your objectives of the program. So for example, in like a GED program, you might have, by the end of the project, 80%, so that's specific, of the 21 to 24-year-olds who participated in our work study program will pass their GED exams. That's measurable, it's clear, it's concise, and it's related to the objective of the program, the GED program. And it's clear how you're going to measure whether or not this worked, the outcomes, and that is through the GED scores. With process evaluation, one way of using process evaluation is to determine if the actual amount or level of services that you're providing really worked. So for example, children who maybe participated in tutoring for 1 hour twice a week, maybe this was a 6-month program, and you found over the first 4 weeks that it didn't seem to be that they were showing enough progress with with their exams. So maybe you're looking back at that program and you're saying, okay, I think we need to revise this to have the children participate in tutoring for 2 hours once a week or 1 hour twice a week. So this is looking at the process, looking at it partway through your program period and saying, how can we change the process to improve the outcomes of the program? Keep in mind that, and that's why I said process evaluation is huge when you're first developing a program, when you're in your first few years of a program. This is exactly the type of evaluation that you want. So how can the process change to improve the outcomes? So keep in mind that negative findings are just as helpful as positive results. And the funders realize that. And sometimes the funders are more excited about the negative findings because it helps you to understand why the program didn't work and how you can modify it to be more effective. And that is exciting to funders to see an organization realize, boy, we thought that we were supposed to do it this way, but now as we look at the results, boy, we found out that we could improve it so much more if we did it, a different way. And funders love that. Qualitative data it can be collected by interviewing, so informal interviews. Participant stories can be useful in collecting your qualitative data. Quantitative data is things like scores on tests, numbers of participants. So both of these types of data are important for you to collect to show your evaluation. Then we want to touch on sustainability. Is the organization's intent to have the program continue after the grant funding is over? And many times the answer of this is yes, but most times the funder doesn't want to feel like an ATM where you're coming back to them year after year for the same program. So if you want the program to continue after the grant funding, then you have to be able to show the funder that your program is sustainable after the funding is over. So how are you going to continue the good work of your program after that grant comes to an end? And simply putting in your application sustainability, we'll reach back out to you again for another grant to sustain the program, is not going to work. They want to see that you have put some time and effort into determining how else you can run the program. They want to see that you have started the program with their funds. Maybe you are going to add to the program and ask for funds to grow the program or add additional pieces to the program, but they are not going to want to simply give you money to sustain the program. So the first thing to look at with sustainability is, can you continue the program with grants from other foundations? So, maybe Buhl Regional Health Foundation might fund the startup of a health and wellness initiative. And then as you're doing your grant seeking, you find 3 other foundations that maybe they don't like to do startup, but they like to see growth. And okay, well, I'm gonna, once I get this program started, I've evaluated it, I've determined what we're going to change, I'm going to reach out to XYZ foundations and ask each of them to help contribute to the growth of the program. Can you show that other grant makers are going to be interested in long-term continuation of your program? And it, again, too, is not going to be the same grant maker every time. You have to show diversity. Number 2, you can find support from corporations or businesses in your area. For the medical equipment recycling program, after about, I bet it was at least 10 years into the program, we realized that medical equipment providers in our community, Healthcare Solutions at that point in time was in downtown Sharon, reached out to them and said, look, we are constantly in need of parts for wheelchairs. Do you ever have extra wheelchairs, or do you ever have wheelchairs come in that are damaged and you can't use them, but you can't return them? And so we started working with these other corporations and businesses in our area to receive donations of equipment for the program. We figured out some government support for the program through, there was a work program for older individuals, job training for them. And we reached out to some of them. I had a gentleman who was a repairman through the senior employment program, and he worked for us for 3 years. The state paid for him to work for us, and he provided excellent service that added to the sustainability of the medical equipment recycling program. So support from other organizations and corporations. Can you start to charge fees for service? Can you collaborate with other organizations and charge them fees for participation of their clients in your services? Can you charge dues? Can you implement a system where, maybe this is something for lower income individuals? Donate what you can. Be creative in how you start to show that the program will be sustainable. Can you sell items? Can you sell activities? Are there fundraising events that you can do? Government support, don't overlook it, even though I'm not a governmental grant writer. Sometimes the government support is available long-term. But a lot of times government support is not available to start up the program. So if you can use foundations to get the program started, look into government support to help sustain the program. And then underlying support from the larger program. So maybe the startup costs were expensive, but the support to maintain it is much less and is doable within the organization. So for example, you needed to build, we had an organization that needed to build a large activities room, and they had the staff already, but they needed a place to bring the kids in during the winter and allow them to ride their bicycles around and kind of blow off some energy before they went back into a learning environment. So they simply needed, okay, we need the activities, the pieces that are going to go in that room, but the pieces are not going to need replaced on an annual basis. So the program is sustainable once the startup is finished. And then that's perfectly fine to put in your grant application. Look, once we get this program started, we already have the staff, we already have the location, we now need the equipment, and it is sustainable without additional funding. And funders will oftentimes look favorably on that. My biggest tip is to use grant funds for activities or resources that have a life beyond the grant. So looking at the overall cost of the program that that you have been asked to write the grant for, what are the items that are one-time startup items, and use foundation grants to start to fund those. So for instance, is there additional training that the staff might need, but once they're trained, they can train individuals? Is there equipment? Are there supplies? Funders want to get bang for their buck. And so, when they're looking at, for instance, again, with the medical equipment recycling program, a funder would buy us a wheelchair, and that wheelchair might go out to 6 individuals over the course of 3 years. And we didn't have to buy another wheelchair. We didn't have to keep buying wheelchairs. That was something that a funder wanted to support because they felt they got bang for their buck. If you could form some sort of a coalition to support the program, this is huge in a funder's eyes. This is going to give you a lot more credibility, and it shows the funders that there's more potential for the program. Coalitions will help to sustain the program, usually then with a small amount of funding coming from each of the partners within the coalition. So what if there is no funding source after the grant is over? Well, why would you want to start a successful program without having sustainability? You wouldn't want to have to stop the program or lay off staff. So the potential for sustainability after the grant is something that every funder is going to look at and consider. And they are most of the time not going to act as an ATM for you. So keep in touch with different advocacy groups in your area, in our area here, that are familiar with the issues that you're writing grants about. So for instance, maybe you want to start a program that is helping families with loved ones struggling from Alzheimer's. And the advocacy group in our region might know of maybe a new Medicare or Medicaid regulation that you're going to be able to tap into once you have that program started. So just keeping on trend with what you're supporting. And like I've said, I think several times, your funder is not an ATM. And I can't tell you how many times we sit in a board meeting, not just here at Buhl Regional Health Foundation, but when I worked with UPMC Foundation, it was frustrating when we would get the same application request over and over again. And that word came out of their mouth all the time: we are not an ATM. Most funders are not going to continuously fund a program. Your funders are there to help you start a new program, expand programs, add new trainings to programs, but they're not there to sustain you. So the next slide talks about the budget. And the budget, I think, aside from your outcomes and your goals and measurables, I think the budget is probably the next most difficult thing for a lot of people to put together. And it really shouldn't be, because if you do these things in the right order, the budget should be very easy. A lot of times people try to put the budget together before they have their outcomes and before they have their objectives and before they have their needs statement. And you're putting the cart before the horse. What you really need to do is complete everything that we have already talked about first. And then you can start to look at those measurables and say, okay, here's how we achieve them. Here's exactly what we need to achieve them. And here's the cost associated with it. And so as you're laying out your program, as you're developing the objectives, even as you're building your collaborations, you have to start thinking about your budget. Think about your staffing. Think about the time that is going to be placed into your evaluation. And the budget then has to be consistent with everything that you have written within your grant application up to this point. Make sure that when you're putting together your budget, you're not overinflating costs, because your funder will know. A lot of grant review committees contain one person who has financial experience. At Buhl Regional Health Foundation, ours does. At UPMC Foundation, our grant committee had 2 finance people on it. Any foundation that is, attempting to prove to anyone, the government, to different people in the community, that their funding is being used effectively, is going to have someone reviewing those grants that has a financial background. A lot of grant review committees also have people who have run programs, possibly executive directors of organizations, and they definitely know what is a realistic cost. So be able to back up the amount that you're requesting for each item in your budget. To develop a realistic budget and be able to explain all of your proposed costs, you have to be able to answer several questions. Exactly, and number one is exactly what staff do you need to complete the project? Professional staff, clerical staff, are they full or part-time? Do they have to be hired to implement the program, or are they already on staff? What skills are they going to need to have? And remember, think back about the program where all of a sudden, halfway through, they're like, oh my gosh, we hired, this type of a person, but we realized now we needed somebody with additional skills. Think about that up front. What are the salary ranges for that type of staff member in your community? Not just Googling what are the salary ranges of somebody with a marketing degree, because you could be pulling salary ranges from Pittsburgh or Los Angeles when you're Googling. You need to find some credible sources within your community. What I used to do with the medical equipment recycling program when I was looking at salary ranges was call different recruiters in our area and say, okay, what are the salary ranges for this type of position? And when you're recruiting, what are you finding in our area? And use that in your grant application. You can say, I spoke with X recruiter and from our area, and this is what the salary range in our community is. Who is going to manage this program is the next question you want to be able to answer. And then make sure that you're allocating part of that person's salary to your budget. If it's not someone that you're bringing on specific to manage the program, is your executive director going to have to manage a piece of that program? Allocate a portion of that person's salary to your budget, and you can use that as in-kind support, which we'll talk about a little bit later, or you can ask the funder to help support that financially. And then, the third thing, do you need to pay rent? What do you need for that particular space? What size does it need to be? If you're not going to pay rent, is that space going to be donated? Maybe you're going to have an after-school program and, it's for children throughout the community, not necessarily, maybe you're running this program at Hickory High School, but you're going to pull individuals from Farrell, Sharon, Hickory, Sharpsville, West Middlesex, and they're all going to come there after school. Well, that donated space, that space for the program, what is the size of it? What is the going rate for the square footage of a room that size in our community? And you can either write that cost into the program and then use it to support the space, or you can use it as, show it as an in-kind support. Another thing to keep in mind, is there going to be any need for out-of-town travel? For instance, trainings. It's so nice right now, a lot of trainings are being conducted by Zoom. But as we start to kind of break back out of the Zoom world and get into traveling again, keep in mind that there are expenses related to traveling to, maybe you have to travel to Pittsburgh for a training. Well, then you want to be able to include mileage. You want to be able to include food for the day for the person. Does it require overnight stay? Those need to be worked into your budget. What equipment and supplies are going to need purchased for the program? And this is where your worksheet comes in, where you have evaluated all of the methods, the ways that you are going to accomplish your objectives. And here are the tools and the supplies that you need for the program. What is the cost of those? And not just throwing, I think a cell phone is going to be $30 a month. Actually researching what is the cost of that going to be. Are you providing stipends for participants? Are the stipends appropriate? Are they, an appropriate amount for the type of individuals that you are that you're needing? Do you need maybe you need a counselor, a certified counselor for a portion of your program? Are you providing them a stipend that is similar to what their hourly rate might be? And if so, have you researched that? And then do you need to hire any consultants? And if so, what type? What will they do? And what are they going to cost? And general rule of thumb is consultants, you want to have done your homework and at least reach out to a few different people who provide the same. You could do, like a little proposal and say, okay, here are exactly the types of things that I will need you to do. What will the cost be? And then send that to 3 separate consultants and do an average of those 3. Or, if you already know what consultant you're going to use, you can put that cost in there, but do your homework and make sure that they're not overcharging you. You're also going to need to decide what you're not going to need to pay for. And how can you use resources that you already have to supplement parts of the program? And this looks excellent in the funder's eyes. Maybe you've already got an administrative assistant that is going to type your newsletters for you. Maybe you already have management staff that is going to spend a portion of their time developing the program. Can you use volunteers? Can you use interns? As you begin with your budget, you've got to start asking yourself 2 key questions. Number 1, is the amount of money that I'm asking for sufficient to achieve my objectives? And number 2, is the amount of money reasonable, or is it outlandish, or does it fall somewhere in between? So let's address the first question first. Is the amount of money you're asking for sufficient? And this is an important question, and this is why you have to have developed your objectives prior to sitting down to put your budget together. So for instance, why are you developing the after-school reading program? Is it to improve reading scores? If so, you need to hire someone who can teach, and that person might require a higher hourly rate. However, if the the reading program is being developed to get kids excited about books, you might be able to hire young interns or recruit volunteers, and they are not going to require a stipend, or an intern won't require as high a salary. They might only require a stipend. But maybe the purpose of your program is to connect kids with kids all over the world by reading letters and writing letters. Well, now you need to look at what type of person do I need to run that program? Plus, what are the supplies that are needed? We need postage. How are we going to find the kids from all over the world? So if you have your objectives laid out, then your budget will begin to make sense. So let's think, maybe you have a custodian, but you can't afford to pay your custodian. And you have an administrative assistant that you feel needs a raise. So let's go ahead and write those salaries right into our grant budget, right? Because without them, nothing else is going to happen. The grant surely has to pay for them. And the answer is no, probably not. The grant makers are going to want their money to go directly to activities that support what their mission is, and therefore what your objectives are that match what their objectives are. So don't get me wrong, grant makers are aware that unless someone pays for the staff member that types and mails the newsletter, or the person that cleans up after the participants have gone out the door, that these jobs are then going to fall on higher paid professional staff, and that will become a detriment to the program. So what you need to do is show that the custodian at your organization plays a role in your program. You might be able to say, okay, a portion of the custodian's salary applies to this program. The same with other support staff. So maybe you have 3 teachers that you're paying $35 to $40 an hour. And then for cleanup, you're going to ask them each to stay for another half hour to an hour. But you have a custodian that makes $15 an hour and knows how to get it cleaned up in an hour. So now you take this and you explain it in your grant budget. Don't try to slip in the entire salaries, because the funders will see that. And you can't justify that the entire salary is related to just this one program. So some funders are not going to want to see any salaries in their application. Buhl Regional Health Foundation is like this. We don't like to see salaries in our application. We like to see program costs. So make sure you're reading their application packet carefully and you're providing them with what they want to see. So how about, well, we really need that administrative assistant. Can't we just put into the grant for a few extra youth workers, but then use that to pay for the assistant? No, that is not ethical. And it's not really very smart to do because your funder will see right through it. Don't forget, the people that are reviewing your grant application and your reporting know the ins and outs of programming. And they know how many people it takes to run a program. A lot of them have written grants themselves and they know the realities and they know the tricks. And if they realize that you're trying to fool them, they're going to be annoyed and your organization immediately loses credibility and you don't get that credibility back. So the key in developing your budget is simply common sense. The key takeaway is that each program budget has to be calculated and described in a way that clearly and adequately addresses the program's needs for staffing, supplies, and other costs. And that budget needs to demonstrate that every activity can be properly performed with the amount of money that you are asking for. So think of all the real costs associated with running this program and be able to show exactly how each of those costs relates to the implementation of the objectives. And this can be time consuming, but I can assure you it is very necessary. And I can give you an example. When I was writing a grant for Shenango River Watchers, we applied to the state for what I call the can opener statue in downtown Sharon. It's a big steel statue. And it has a circle around it that needed to be planted with native plants. And so we wrote a grant that would, I want to say we had in there like 500 tulip bulbs and we had 1,000 daffodil bulbs. And we needed to replace some bricks. So we had money in there for 300 bricks. And we had money in there for 2 benches. And we actually had to, they made us break that down to, we wanted red tulips, yellow tulips, and white tulips. Well, how many of these tulip bulbs are going to be red? How many are going to be white? How many are going to be yellow? It was an extensive grant. How many boards, pieces of wood are going to be used for each bench? How many bolts? How many nuts do you need? How much concrete do you need? Specifically, how many bags of concrete do you need? We got the entire project funded through this particular state grant. And when we went to our supplier, we found out that we couldn't get white tulip bulbs. We could only get red tulip bulbs. And we actually had to go back to the funder and say, we know we submitted for red, white, and yellow, but now we can't get white. Can we shift that to X number of red bulbs, X number of yellow bulbs? And we had to get permission. So this is truly how time consuming it can be to write your budget, but it is necessary because maybe your funder doesn't like to fund white tulip bulbs. Maybe they only want to see red tulip bulbs. Maybe your funder wants to see 2x4s, not 2x6s on a bench. Your budget has to be that specific for a lot of funders. And then you have to be able to work back and forth between the text and in your proposal and your budget so that every time you talk about something in your proposal, that it is included in your budget. Because funders will look through your grant proposal and they'll start scratching their heads and saying, oh, gee, in this part of their proposal, they said they're going to do they're going to plant red, yellow, and white tulip bulbs, but gee, I wonder why the tulip bulbs aren't listed here as something that they need. Where are they getting the tulip bulbs? Even if you're not asking the funder for those tulip bulbs, you need to show them in your budget, and you need to show that, maybe you're getting those from a different funder, and that's in-kind support, and that helps lend credibility to your project. To complicate matters, grant makers vary in what they want to see in this budget section. Some prefer a spreadsheet. Some actually physically give you a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet literally has all of the calculations built into it, and you can't go into that and change those calculations. And that spreadsheet might match a spreadsheet further on down in the grant application. And so it allows that funder to say, they're kind of flubbing the numbers a little bit here, because these three numbers in this spreadsheet should equal this, but they're not. Some might prefer just a narrative, and some prefer both. So the best way to start is to sit down with your objectives and methods section of the grant, and with a good old-fashioned piece of paper and a pencil, write down every item that you mention in that section of your grant. You mention teachers, write down teachers. How many? Do you mention art projects? What are the supplies necessary for those art projects? Do you mention yoga? What about yoga mats? Where is the activity going to take place in a classroom, in a building, in a school? Do you have to pay for that, etc.? Now, once you have everything written down, put a cost to each item. Now you've started to have an outline for the budget and the beginning of whatever type of budget that funder wants to see. Then the budget narrative is also sometimes called the budget justification. Some funders won't ask for this, but most funders do want to see a narrative. I don't believe the Community Foundation asks for a budget narrative, but I could be wrong. I have not written a grant to them in quite a while. But the narrative or the budget justification is simply words that describe pieces of your budget item by item. So literal sentences. In the narrative, you're going to relate each item to the objective or the activity that it supports, one sentence per line. You might think that it's common knowledge that a basketball program would need basketballs, but the funder wants to see that you actually have thought about the fact that you need basketballs. So they're going to want to see that A, you either have the funding in there to purchase the basketballs, or B, the basketballs are a line item in your budget, but you already have them or you're getting them donated. So the budget narrative then would include that to implement the after-school basketball program for 50 students, the organization needs 5 basketballs or 10 basketballs. And the unit cost of each basketball is $6, and then the total. So you would write that out in a sentence. And then the total should be as close as possible to the real number that you would pay for those basketballs. Rounding up a number to the nearest 100 or 1,000 suggests to the funder that you have not taken time to research the cost, and that you're either trying to take a shortcut or you're just plain lazy. So showing the exact cost of 6 basketballs demonstrates to the funder that you have a well thought out program and that you have actually taken time to research the cost of the program. Budgets should only be rounded to the nearest dollar. Now, how do you put that into a format that the funder wants to see? So find yourself a spreadsheet software tool. I used Excel. And then establish your budget period. Will you report by calendar year or fiscal year? How does the funder want you to report? Does the funder prefer to, maybe the funder is operating on fiscal year and prefers that you report to them on fiscal year. And that can be very difficult. And we had to do that with the medical equipment recycling program. I actually had a funder that wanted, I had a funder that was calendar year. I had several funders that were fiscal year, and their fiscal year ended June 30th. And then I had a third funder whose fiscal year ended in October. It was a federal funder. And so you, as the grant writer, need to be able to pool all of the information needed based on what they are asking you for, calendar year, fiscal year, and report it within that period. And that can be very difficult, especially if you operate on a different year. Now you take all of that information and then start to divide your budget into 4 sections. You want your personnel services, benefits, and then other than personnel services, and then indirect costs. Some funders don't require you to show your personnel services and your benefits in separate sections. Some funders don't even want to see personnel costs. So make sure you check with your funder first, but still, for ease of you putting your budget together, it helps for you to have it laid out in these particular 4 sections. So let's talk a little bit about what falls into each of these categories. Personnel services includes the cost for all of the project staff, not the program, not the organization, but the staff that are participating in the project by title and the percentage of time or number of hours that they're going to spend on the project. So for instance, project manager, maybe that project manager is only going to spend 3 hours a week managing this project. Then you might have teachers. Maybe you have 5 teachers and they're going to spend 3 hours apiece per week on the project. Unless the grant maker is ruling it out, you can include the time that management is spending on the program, including the development of the project or the program, the maintenance of it, the training for it, the recruitment for it. All of that can be worked into your grant ask if the funder allows it. Then you need to break down your staff by full-time, part-time, year-round, or seasonal. Part-time, for most budgeting purposes, is someone who works less than 21 hours a week for your organization, because the fringe costs or the benefit costs for part-time is completely different than that for full-time. So now you have each of these things on a different line, and each budget line represents 1 or more staff members with the same title. So for instance, the first line might show the annual costs for the project director at 50% of full-time, because they're only going to spend 50% on your project, or 20 hours a week, because the rest of the director's time is spent elsewhere. And then you're including on that line the corresponding salary. And then another line, like I said, might show 3 teachers, 15 hours a week, $40 an hour. Your third line might show an assistant maintaining student records at 50% of a full-time salary, or 20 hours a week, maybe at $22,000 for the year. So that's how you start to lay out line by line your staffing. And then if you have staff that's going to be working on the project intermittently, but they're not going to be paid throughout the entire grant, then you want to show them on separate lines in a similar manner. And then maybe you're not even going to ask for any of the funding from the funder for that. So then you start to show their salaries as in-kind donations or in-kind support. And who is providing the support for that? Is it your own organization? Maybe that the school has said, we'll supply the teachers, as long as they're only working from, like June to September while school is out, but we'll go ahead and provide them to you on a salary basis or an in-kind basis. So this starts to show your funder that you have outside commitment, or your organization has its own commitment to this project. Your fringe benefits includes Social Security, unemployment, health insurance, if you give vacation pay, holiday pay, pension. And you want to show this separately because different organizations and agencies have different benefits packages. Fringe is usually estimated at a % of the total cost for the salaries. Fringe benefits vary, so I can't recommend what this should be, but according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, it averages around 25%. Many nonprofits, though, have a lower fringe benefit rate, and funders will look at that. They don't want to see that you're spending exorbitant amounts on fringe benefits. And then your other than personnel services, this becomes all the costs associated with your project that are not related to staff. And this includes the program's share of the rent of the space, any supplies like paper, pens, copies, your travel would fall into here, books, insurance, different equipment that's needed. This could also include somebody providing temporary service that is not an employee. So maybe you're going to have a theater teacher come in one day, and that teacher is going to help produce the play, but they're not an employee of your program. It's somebody that you're giving maybe a stipend to, or maybe a trainer who's going to come in and train your staff for a day, or somebody who's going to evaluate the program, or an auditor who's going to audit the program. So be sure that these costs are researched and that they fall within what the funder is going to fund. And then keep in mind to show in-kind expenses as well. So if you're not going to be required to pay for the rent of the space, that is an in-kind cost. And that is in-kind is something that is donated. And it can be any type of services, or it's like support or donated goods or services. And it can be volunteer time. It could be food, t-shirts, printing material, accounting services, office equipment, vehicles, rent, utilities, renovations, anything that is being donated to you. Don't discount the in-kind. Make sure that it's written into your budget. Don't look at it as, oh, I don't really need to include that, because your funder wants to see the additional buy-in by either other organizations or by your own program. And then indirect costs are the costs that are agency-wide or organization-wide, and they're not reflected in your program budget because they're really not allotable to any individual program, but you have to have them to keep the doors open. So this includes like your human resources staff, if you have some, your fiscal staff, if you have them, utilities, rent for the entire building, custodial services, security, clerical costs that are associated with the entire organization. Some federal agencies might instruct you that the maximum amount of overhead that you can request to help with these indirect costs is between 5% and 10% of your total budget. Most of the time, foundations don't want to see these indirect costs worked into your budget from what you're asking from them. Volunteer time estimates, and this falls under your in-kind support. Don't discount the type of volunteer that you have and what they normally might be paid. So volunteer time estimates can be calculated using the average amount any organization or business would pay someone who is providing that service And then you multiply that by the number of hours the person is performing that service. So for instance, at the medical equipment recycling program, we had an accountant on our board and, or on our advisory board. And he used to do all of the accounting for us. And it might have taken him, 4 hours a week or 5 hours a week. And his normal hourly rate might have been $60 an hour. So as a volunteer, because we didn't pay him to do this, we would have accountant, as under our in-kind services, something that is donated towards this program. Maybe he was spending 2 hours per week on the program at $60 an hour. This was in-kind support for that program. Calculate your items on the market value of, so, if you have a new item, I don't know if you're purchasing a van for your organization, calculate that on the market value of what that van would truly cost. You're purchasing the van, you're showing that as in-kind support at maybe $60,000 or $80,000. I don't even know how much a van costs these days. And then used items should be valued at an appreciated value. So you're receiving a, somebody is providing you with a full office of furniture, but it's all been used. I can remember at the MERP program, we were trying to find a desk and a filing cabinet and an office chair and a credenza to outfit a new staff member. And we went to actually Mercer County Housing Authority had an office that they were closing down, and they had a beautiful desk that that they gave to us that probably initially had cost, I bet, easily $3,000, but it was 15 years old. So you can't really show the value of that as $3,000. You might show it as $500 or $100. You would want to look at that desk and depreciate it over time, and then use that as the value within your grant application. I know this sounds daunting, and it is a lot of work, but once you get the first one completed, it's much easier the next time because you already have all those pieces, parts pulled together. And, for instance, maybe the next grant that you're writing requires the information to be reported in a different way or shown in a different way, but you already have all the pieces laid out line by line, and then you can pull them and put them in the way the funder wants to be seen. If you need help, see if there's students from one of our local colleges that might be interested in helping as an internship. And then there's also businesses in our area that allow their employees to do community service. For instance, one of the accountants that we had on the MERP board was from Hillbarth and King. And Hillbarth and King requires their employees to do so many hours of community service out of the year. They want to see especially their younger, newer employees on boards of different organizations. So look for these businesses. I know some of the local banks, actually, I want to say Huntington Bank had provided financial bookkeeping for us at one time. So those businesses a lot of times want to, show that they're giving community support by lending the accountant, the bookkeeper, an attorney. We have an attorney on our board. Do we go to that attorney all the time for every question? No. We also have an attorney that we pay, but sometimes it's appropriate to go to a volunteer attorney and ask for advice. If you have a volunteer attorney, make sure that you're including their wage as in-kind support and whatever you're using them for this program. Then your funder might also require that the revenue section of your budget includes a projected income statement. So this can be a little bit harder to do because you have to estimate your revenue from year to year, but include things like fundraising, fees for service, funding from different businesses, funding from other grants. And then I do have a revenue and expense worksheet that I will give to you. And I also have a couple sample budgets. The operating budget is simply what does it take to operate the organization, the revenues and expenses. And a lot of times, your funder is going to want to see your overall operating budget plus your program budget. And some grant makers have, like I said, a budget template that you're required to use. And if you're not sure, call the grant maker. Now, the worksheet that I'm going to give you that is a revenue and expense budget worksheet, it lays out pretty much, the revenue and it has a column for cash required, has a column for in-kind contributions, has a column for total budget. But what I would advise you to do is take this worksheet, manipulate it a little bit, and add a column for the foundation that you're writing to. Out on that far edge, I would write, Buhl Regional Health Foundation, and or swap your total budget with that column and put the foundation that you're writing to. This helps you to organize your ideas. So maybe from foundations, you already have 30,000 coming from cash. And then you might have 5,000 coming from in-kind contributions. And your total budget is $65,000. In your next column, who are you asking that 30,000, that additional 30,000 from? Is it one foundation? And if so, Buhl Regional Health Foundation maybe is the title of that column, and you would put the 30,000 in that. And then, are you finding individual contributions? Maybe you're getting cash of $3,000 and in kind of 10,000, and 13,000 is your total. And then donated printing and supplies. So using this worksheet, but adding the funder to it so that you can organize your thoughts as to what you're asking that funder to contribute. And then we do have a sample budget that I pulled from the grant writing book that I talked about. It's this, the only grant writing book you'll ever need. And it's a budget for a literacy program. And it just kind of shows you how to lay out the number of hours, the number of weeks, the annual cost, any in-kind. It's a really good format for what you might be looking for, what a funder might be looking for as far as a budget goes. And so I see we are about 8 minutes away from the 12 o'clock hour. Are there questions, Jess, in the chat? I'm going to go ahead real quick then and just cover the background statement. And if you have questions about the budget or about your goals, objectives, all of that we've covered today, shoot an email to Jess and let her know, and we'll work on getting those answered, because to me, those are really the most important pieces of your grant application. And I know I keep saying this about every portion. The needs statement is important too, but matching all of that is the most important thing. And then obviously the executive summary, but the background statement is simple. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. So I think we could cover it really quickly. It's after you've developed your budget, then you start to work on the rest of the application. And the background statement is simply a description of your organization, its mission, its vision, its values. How did it come to be? When was it founded? Where is it located? What is the legal status? Is it a 501c3? Is it umbrellaed under a 501c3? Briefly touch on the demographics of the community that your organization serves. And then how do your board members reflect these demographics, which we have already talked about. Include a little description of the organization's role in the community and who your partners are. And then talk a little bit about how your organization is unique. Are there any innovative programs or special services that you provide that are not provided by anyone else in the community? And have you received special awards or recognition for those programs? And then you can include just a brief history of funding by other sources, especially if they add credibility to your organization. So, if you've received funding from Toyota Foundation, in the amount of $600,000 for the past 3 years, I mean, that's credible. That shows that a large foundation has supported you, and that would definitely be in your background statement. Put your primary goal in there, but really just 1 to 2 paragraphs, of what you're primarily looking to do, and then how you're establishing credibility through what you're looking to do. And then ask yourself while you're reading it, what is the key information that this funder needs to know about me so that they can solidify a case for support? Testimonials are good, but they should be kept to a minimum, maybe even a sentence, but only if they support your cause. And then summarize how many staff, how many board members, how many volunteers. And this should just be primarily informative, just simply describing the qualifications of the organization. So after you write this brief statement, you would want to read it, and you would want to be able to say that it answers the question, is my organization credible? Through showing the history, the qualifications, the purpose, the programs, the population served, the number of people served, major accomplishments. And then does it suggest that there are other sources of community support and partnerships? And does it highlight any awards that you might have received and any special recognitions that you've received? Now, if you've received, maybe your organization, I'm thinking about when, I was writing grants for Shenango River Watchers. And back in the day, we received a large settlement from a Superfund site. They had a site that had dumped illegally. It became a Superfund site, and the business was required to clean it up, and also in addition was required to give financial support to nonprofit environmental organizations that what they were cleaning up or doing was affected by this dumping. And Shenango River Watchers received, and I can't remember the amount of money, but say $60,000 from this. I used that as credibility in my grant applications for the next 5 or 6 years, because it was pertinent. The federal government actually came to us, or the state government actually came to us as an environmental organization in our area and said, hey, look, this person dumped, they contributed to, negatively to the quality of the water in the Shenango River. And we feel that your organization is doing good work to clean up that river. And so we would like you to have a portion of the fine that they are paying. And so putting something like that in your background statement helps the funder to see, wow, they really are a credible organization. And this is something that I truly want to be a part of. Other than that, I think this is a good place to stop, because the executive summary is a really important piece to write. So those of you, the person that is here in person, you're just going to have to ignore the next slides on, and we'll touch on that in the next class. So our last class, we'll talk about how to, first of all, the executive summary, which again is a very important piece of the application, and then how to pull it all together, what to do. I've got a really good slide on funders' pet peeves. Some suggestions that came from funders, great information about electronic submissions, a little wee bit about federal funding, and then if you get the grant, what do you do? And if you don't get the grant, what do you do? But mainly, what are some tips for when you get the grant? So we'll look forward to that for the next session. We can turn off the recording